Hello, welcome to the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined by my co-host, Scott Pianowski. We had a week away. You had to leave us for John Elway, but you're back. You're back now.
Yeah, I'm back. Ready to talk some baseball. Like John Elway, who was, a baseball player and a football player. I am a fantasy football analyst and a fantasy baseball analyst. So let's do this thing, man. This is the money time for fantasy baseball, of course. This is when people are trying to move up in their rotisserie leagues. They're going through the stress of the fantasy baseball playoffs. I have one of those teams that was in first place all year. Now I'm the big favorite in the semifinals, but what would be more stinging than to lose in the playoffs? So we didn't get the good people some information.
Had that first place all year.
Yeah.
Glasnow injury, Austin Riley injury, Wilson Contreras injury, ran into a hot team in the semifinals and done.
That's the thing. I don't mind losing so much. Everybody doesn't want to lose, but I want to lose with the guys who got me there all season, right? I mean, I guess that's what you signed up with Tyler Glasnow. You knew at some point the Dodgers, they're such a load management team. It seems like half their staff is at any point on the IL because they're playing for October. But I just want to be able to roll out the guys I was rolling out who were stopping people in June and July. Where's that team, right? But
exactly.
And also, I think what hurt me, it sounds incredibly whiny, but I'll say it anyway. Because my team was so good during the regular season, I didn't have the freedom to be as aggressive on the wire as I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I see some of the people who can beat me now in the playoffs, and they were getting to players who was like, well, I wanted to pick up this player, but I didn't have a spot for him. My team was intact. My team was healthy, so I didn't have some of that wiggle room to improve my roster or at least add players that was blocking value from other teams. But yeah, whatever. I'll look forward to next week. Nobody cares about this team but me, but I'll look forward to next week to telling you how I triumphantly advanced to the finals and hopefully through some of the information that we give out to the good people today so we can all share the experience.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we're going to continue to talk about. I posted a Hitting Streamers article over at NBC Sports yesterday, and we talked about just the idea that we are in the stage of the season where you also need to be streaming hitters, not just pitchers. If you've got a fringe roster guy and maybe he's been good for you for, he got you there, but he's been of late, not bad, not great. And then the schedule doesn't line up right, but there's somebody on the waiver wire who's been similarly decent and the schedule is much better. You kind of need to play. You need to be a little bit fast and loose with your moves at this point in the year. So we're going to talk through some of that stuff at the end of the show or in the second half of the show. We are also going to talk about what you can do in September if you're in a redraft league or a keeper league and you've been eliminated. There's still information to be gleaned, lessons to be learned from September baseball that can help you for next season. So Scott and I will give some insight, even if you're not in the playoffs or if you're in a roto league and you don't think you can finish in the money. There are some things you can do in September to help your team out or help your team out next year as well. And we'll rank our streamers for the weekend so we can help you with some of the pickups there if you're, in your final stretch of your
Let me duck in two really quick things before we get started. This is a phrase I've heard Fred Zinke use before, and I think I've maybe heard you use it before too. I am so focused on Mr. Right now and not Mr. Right. I don't care what a player's full season profile is. If he's producing in the last few weeks, if he's, I look like Johnny LaDuca with Tampa Bay, his full season stats would be like, oh, why would you want this guy? What he's done the last few weeks where he's slotted in the lineup, I'm interested in him. And I know this is the simplest tip in the world, but it's something I do. And I think something a lot of people out there should do also. Football is a behemoth. And Sundays are dominated by the NFL schedule. You have to put in reminders or even an alarm. Sometimes I'll set an alarm for 12:45 that reminds me just to check my baseball lineups to make sure I don't have critical dead spots, guys who aren't playing that day, who I need to swap out. I'm trying to win the fantasy playoffs because like a lot of other people, the NFL calendar, I'm trying to sort through start-sit questions on Twitter, and I'm trying to get my own rosters in play. I have some DFS lineups. Make sure you have whatever it is that reminds you. If it's calendars, if it's a string on your finger, it's an alarm, whatever it is, because 90% of life is showing up. And I've realized that can be difficult. Maybe your kids are back in school. Maybe you're back in school. September, life is a little bit different. So just make sure you play it to the finish. Just make sure you can beat a lot of people just by being thorough. You probably noticed on your waiver runs, they've been less competitive because some of your opponents have checked out. So just make sure, be the guy who plays it to the end, because usually there's an upswing you can get from that just by showing up.
Yeah. And there's some fun things that happen when you play to the end, like the opportunity to pick up Kumar Rocker.
Sure.
He's starting tomorrow for the Texas Rangers against the Seattle Mariners. For those who are unfamiliar, I'm sure everybody's familiar because it's talked about ad nauseum. Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter were teammates at Vanderbilt. They were the top 2 pitching prospects in their respective draft. Kumar Rocker was originally drafted by the Mets and had a shoulder issue at the time, and so he wound up not signing. And then he went back into the draft and was signed by the Rangers. So he and Leiter wound up in the same organization. Rocker's coming off Tommy John surgery, but looked really good in AAA and is now getting a chance on Wednesday against a kind of like a fledgling Mariners offense. How confident are you in Kumar Rocker? Are you willing to start him in leagues where you're still competitive?
Oh, for sure. I mean, he fills out the uniform really well. 6'5". He was, as you said, a ballyhooed prospect. The Tommy John surgery is really a year and a half removed, I think, now. And the minor league stats, right? 5 walks, 55 strikeouts. The Mariners have been, even though they've been a competitive team, they've been a team we can attack. We've seen that all season, so I'm not worried at all about their line. I mean, they bat guys in the middle of their lineup who would bat 7th, 8th, or 9th on a better lineup. And the park helps too. So the only worry here is I don't think they would let him go deep in a game. Their season's over. He's a future player for them, even though he's already 24. They don't want to overexpose him or maybe give him too big of a lift. But I could see him easily pitching 5 innings and striking out 8 guys. I mean, yeah, I want a piece of that.
Yeah, James Shiano and I talked about him yesterday on the Rotoworld Baseball Q&A, which we do on YouTube at 1 p.m. We are going to keep doing those through the rest of the season, so make sure you check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at Samulski NYC, and I tweet out the links for that. But we talked about the foundation of a good pitching prospect being a really solid fastball is important because we've seen a lot of pitchers come up with, hey, he's got a great slider. Hey, he's got a great curve. Drew Thorpe, oh, he's got an elite changeup. But if you can't consistently throw strikes and get ahead of batters at the major league level with a good fastball, you could have a great slider all you want. It's not going to do much. It is not going to get you where you need to go because you need to get in those 2 strike counts. You need to consistently get ahead of major league hitters. Kumar Rocker, I believe it was Thomas Nesco. I could be wrong on Twitter. I apologize if I'm wrong, but somebody posted the metrics of Kumar Rocker's fastball, the IVB, the release height, all of that. And the only fastball it comped to at the major league level was Paul Skeens. It's the only fastball it comped to metrically,
not bad.
Is a pretty nice comparison, right? Then you've got a guy who throws 98 miles an hour, but also has 7 feet of extension on his release.
Yeah.
So that's getting on hitters so quickly where that probably looks like 102, 103 mile an hour fastball when you've got that kind of extension. So if he can locate that in the zone, he's going to get ahead of guys early. He's got a really nice 2-plane slider. He'll throw to hitters of both handedness. So and he has other pitches. But even if it's just relying on those 2 pitches, we saw Jared Jones have a great rookie season relying on essentially 2 pitches. It works if you have other things in the arsenal to keep hitters off balance. But I think Rocker, I love starting him against the Mariners. And I think that he's in for a pretty solid rest of the season.
Is it funny too? And I swear this will be the last football comp I make on this show. A quarterback height, right? You want a quarterback to be a certain height. You can succeed under 6 feet, but it means you have to do some different things. And if you're freakishly tall, it actually might get in your way of being a good NFL quarterback. And that's so similar to starting pitchers. It's not that you can't be good at a smaller height, but we'd probably like you to at least fit the minimum height. And when you're 6'4" or 6'5", like Rocker is, Clemens was, I think 6'4", that's an advantage to you. Yeah. And if you're freakishly tall, if you're like Randy Johnson, it took him a while to figure it out. Obviously he did. He was fabulous in his 30s, but sometimes you can actually be a little bit too tall for the position. And it maybe just leads to mechanical problems or whatever. But I care how tall a pitcher is or what his extension is, or how close is he to the plate when he's actually delivering it. So somebody who's in that 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" range, to me, that's kind of the sweet spot for a pitcher.
Yeah. I love and the build in terms of just also lower body, how you're going to hold up, things like that all work in his favor. The Rangers rotation is also going to get back Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom this week. Yeah. They are set to go. You can't add them in most leagues. They're on rosters. It'll be great to see them pitch. Are you throwing those guys right back in lineups?
I am in with a couple of deGrom shares, knowing that he might not even get to the 5 innings. It might be 3 or 4 innings, and that's a little bit of just the fanboy in me. I just want to watch him throw 3 or 4 innings, strike out 7 guys. I mean, I don't think people remember that Jacob deGrom was great. I don't think people remember exactly just how historically great he was the last time he pitched, any chunk of a season. Okay, so that 2021 season where he threw 92 innings for the Mets, he had a 1.08 ERA and a .554 WHIP, which I think might be the lowest WHIP of all time of anybody who got to 90 innings. I mean, he got Cy Young votes in down ballot votes in a year he threw 92 innings. And then the next season,
so good.
His WHIP was still 0.75. Jacob deGrom, man, I don't think he's going to make it. The Hall of Fame is going to have to shift what their expectations are for starting pitchers. Not only are we not going to get, if Verlander doesn't make it to 300, we won't see another 300 win pitcher maybe in our lifetimes, unless they change the rule or something like that. But it might be a while before we see another 200 win pitcher. DeGrom has 84. Just for 3 or 4 years, he was the guy. He won the back-to-back Cy Youngs. He could have won it the next year. He only because of injury. In the pandemic season, he finished third. I would put Johan Santana in, who's a little bit of a DeGrom type of case, where he was dominant for a short time and then he had kind of a fade out. To me, I've always said that Hall of Fames are about Nirvana, not Huey Lewis and the News. I want people who resonate. So I just want to see Jacob deGrom pitch in a Major League Baseball game again and be great. Now, Max Scherzer is going to make the Hall of Fame. I'll also be interested in watching him pitch, but we've seen him the last few years. DeGrom's been almost like a mystery man now. It's you whisper about him, like, did it really happen? It almost feels like his career wasn't even real because it came so quickly and it left so quickly. So I'm gonna start him. I'm probably gonna bet a prop on him. I don't even care if that stuff loses. I just want to see Jacob deGrom on a mound doing what he does, dotting the I on the outside corner at 98.
Yeah, 6 elite seasons from deGrom. He was a 4-year college guy. He didn't get called up until 26. That was also a little bit of obviously the injuries are part of the deGrom story. The other is just where baseball was at, right? Him not making his MLB debut until he was 26 years old is just, it's a little bit of the sign of the times, right? Nowadays, his pro debut was when he was 22 years old, right? When he was 24, he was crushing the minor leagues for the Mets in, high A, reach AA in 2025. Like, he may have been pushed more aggressively than he would have been, normally. And again, we talk about injuries; they're a very real thing. But deGrom's 6 amazing years before the injuries really reared their head. He was supposed to go 60 pitches in his last rehab start. He only went 49 because it took him 49 pitches to go through 4 innings. He just kind of like annihilated the opposition. So if they were set to throw him at 60 before, maybe he can get to 60, 65, which could get Jacob deGrom 5 innings, depending on how efficient he is. But I think you're looking more at 4. And like you said, as long as I'm not like desperate for wins, I am more than happy to put deGrom in my lineup and watch for the strikeouts.
And can it really be 8 years ago that the Mets had this glorious rotation? Bartolo Colon, Noah Syndergaard, Jacob deGrom, Steven Matz, and Matt Harvey.
Yeah.
Okay. You had the 43-year-old who led the team in wins, and Bartolo Colon is a documentary waiting to happen. And then the arguments were, who's going to be the ace of the staff? Is it going to be Syndergaard? Is it going to be Harvey? I think most people probably thought it was one of those two guys that eventually became deGrom. I always thought Matz was an interesting fantasy pick, and I feel like I got let down more often than not. We also I broke my promise. We did a fantasy football event with the Mets a few years ago, and Matz and deGrom were at it. Also, Dwight Gooden was at it, who was just wonderful as a team ambassador and somebody who just really approachable. And we had a good time talking to him. But the good guys, good fantasy players. But it just seemed like the Mets, if you can keep your pitchers healthy, that could have been a team that dominated for like 5, 6, 8, 10.
That
10
had
years.
The Mets had that also in the years prior to that with like the Jason Isringhausen trio, where those guys never quite panned out the way.
Right. There's the great episode of Arliss, the HBO show, where they have a fantasy episode that hits all the tones of what fantasy sports is like. And they drafted Isringhausen and Pulsifer and early in the season, they have like 1 win through their first 11 starts, and they're trying to put together a package for Jeff Bagwell. They're trying to trade 4 great players for Jeff Bagwell. And people of a certain age will remember even in the 80s where the Mets had Cone and they had Gooden, they had Darling, and they traded for Frank Viola. And it looked like, oh my, how would this team win the World Series every year, go to the World Series every year? But something always seemed to go wrong, except against my beloved Red Sox. But anyway, the checkered Mets, look like a playoff team right now. They're kind of doing it with smoke and mirrors, I think, because not a lot has gone right. I feel like with this team, although Lindor is an MVP, a quasi MVP candidate, we know Ohtani's going to win, but it's just funny that this is the team that's going to get to the playoffs where so many Met teams that had maybe bigger goals before the season, fell well short of those goals.
Yeah, that's why Mets fans will talk about being cursed and talk about the stress of being a Mets fan.
For sure.
The Yankees on the other side of town finally called up Jasson Dominguez this week. They said he was going to start regularly after being called up. Are you trying to get Jasson Dominguez in any leagues where you can?
Yeah, I end up missing him in the leagues where he would make sense to me. And do you understand the way the Yankees run their prospects or their organization sometimes? Because the timetables never make sense to me. I think I probably would have played this differently if it was a different organization, but I just expected the Yankees to have like a plan that didn't make any sense. So I'm out of the Dominguez business. I'm certainly curious. I hope it doesn't hurt me. Did you get any shares?
I did, because he's still rostered in just 40% of Yahoo leagues. So some of the leagues where I'm still active over there, I did scoop up shares. And I think that's, a little bit of fatigue, right? Some people, his name has been bandied about since like May. And so I think people are like, all right, fine, Jasson Dominguez, we get it. But now he is finally up, and he's going to play. I think also you get like teams are eliminated. They're not searching the wire, so they're maybe not seeing it. And he hasn't done anything, and he's only played 2 games since coming up. But he's 1 for 7 with a stolen base and a run. So he hasn't had one of those, oh my God, like games since being called up where people who are just doing peripheral scanning of the wire are like, I have to go get him. But listen, he is going to play every day for the Yankees because they said they weren't going to call him up otherwise. He's going to hit 6th or 7th. He's got power to easily drive the ball out of the yard in that ballpark. He has the ability to steal a handful of bases. I think he's the best hitting prospect you're going to get this year. And I say that knowing there's only 3 weeks left in the season, but he's the guy. And if you have any money left over, he is the guy to add. I would be adding him over these second chance guys like Kobe Mayo and Kyle Manzardo and Jordan Walker. Like, I'd rather have Dominguez. I think he's going to contribute across all 5 categories.
Does he remind you of anybody? I see a little bit of Johnny Damon maybe in his game.
With far more power, in my opinion, far more pop. But yeah, I'd have to look at at a little bit of I'm so influenced by his physical appearance in those comparisons that it's like he looks like a 40 homer bat that like you want to compare him to a 40 homer bat. For
sure, yeah. For a guy who's just 5'9", he's very solidly put together. I got you.
Yes. Yeah. But that's good news for the Yankees. We got good news for our Red Sox, despite the fact that they continue to fall out of the playoff hunt and are probably not going to make the postseason. But they got Trevor Story back. Trevor Story is back. My question to you is a 2-parter. Is Trevor Story himself a must-add? And then how do you see the playing time shaking out in Boston now that Trevor Story is back and Ceddanne Rafaela has moved back into the outfield?
Man, because so much of what Story does is there's going to be a lot of swing and miss in his game. I just would not feel comfortable with his timing at this point. And also with the Red Sox, they're going to be basically, they know right now, not only they probably out of the playoffs, but even if they made it, they have, with their rotation being as up and down as it's been, I don't think they have any upside if they made the playoffs. This entire final month of September for them is evaluate. It's try to see what you have coming back. I think the lineup's going to be fluid day over day. So I would love it if Trevor Story hit. I have very low expectations for him. I didn't get in any wrestling matches over him. And honestly, if people want to play Trevor Story against me, I'm totally fine with it.
Yeah, I added him in a few places where I could use some speed. He did steal a base already in coming back, and that was good to see. And then, I rostered him in a couple of places where I just like deep leagues, like 15-team leagues, where I needed middle infielder, where I had guys like Orlando Arcia, where it's like if I'm rotating through that level of player, I like Story in that lineup. And I like, next week, the Red Sox face the Rays, whose pitching staff is not quite the pitching staff that we've seen in the past. They do get the Twins after that, and we know the Twins are a solid pitching staff for sure. But then the Red Sox will end the season. They get Toronto and they get Tampa Bay again. So I think it's not like, totally green light go schedule, but there's not many pitchers with Toronto and Tampa Bay that I'm like, oh man, I absolutely can't start my guy against.
The other thing that frustrated me about a possible story ad is just the schedule it's mostly road games, and they don't play more than 3 home games in a row at any point over the rest of the schedule. So you first see Story, you're like, okay, great. It's like kind of like Colorado's, right? I'm thinking of a rocky hitter. Well, show me the 7-game homestand. Where can I take advantage of that? And Story, unfortunately, doesn't get a week of home games, or doesn't even get anything past the 3-game clump. And even, in some cases, like there's a day game after a night game, there might be a logical place where they give him a day off because they don't want to overextend him. So I wish the schedule was a little bit more friendly for Story. I think that could be kind of a chink in the armor here.
Yeah. And it looks like against right-handed pitching, you're going to get Yoshida at DH. You're going to get Story at short. You're going to get Casas at first. You're going to get Tyler O'Neill in the outfield. You're going to get Wilyer Abreu in the outfield. You're going to get, actually it's been Jarren Duran in the outfield every time. Tyler O'Neill in the outfield every time. And against all righties, Wilyer Abreu has been in the outfield. It's actually been Story and Rafaela shifting off against righties since Story has come back. And then against lefties, obviously they're both in the lineup because Abreu sits and Yoshida sits and Casas sits. So that's something to keep in mind. Rafaela has had a really great rookie season from a fantasy perspective, and he was making like really clear gains as the season went on. He has cooled in September and actually at the second half of August. Long season for these guys, these rookies. He has played 139 games this year. That's more than he's played in any minor league year since. So Rafaela is going to get a few more days off. I dropped him in some, NFBC format leagues, some 12-team leagues where I was holding him and using him often because I don't think the playing time is going to be as consistent. And I think that, he has hit a little bit of a rookie wall here.
So what's our strain pun? Is it here's where the story ends? Is it story checks out? What are we going with?
I think or you could say, because he's back, you could say it's a never-ending story.
A never-ending story, yeah.
As it keeps like going on. Okay. You could go with that one. I was going to say, speaking of never-ending story, except it's the same old story. Reynaldo Lopez to the IL with shoulder soreness. Are you assuming his regular season is over? I mean, there's only 3 weeks left.
Any pitcher who gets hurt this late in the season basically is, I don't mean this callously, but it's like totally off the radar. You have to. I wouldn't hold anybody. I wouldn't start anybody on spec when they come back. It's just thank you. Next.
And do you care who the Braves call up? Are you into Bryce Elder, Ian Anderson, AJ Smith-Shawver? Do you want one guy in particular to get that job, or you'll take all of them because it's the Braves?
Well, it's funny. With the Braves, like any hitter that they recycle from some other organization, I expect the Braves voodoo. They've kind of taken over from the Cardinals in that respect, where I don't know what they do to their hitters, but they make them better when they come over. At least, maybe it doesn't last forever because Jared Kelenic hasn't been good lately. But they're pitching. Maybe it's because I hate Jethro Tull, but I don't trust Ian Anderson. Elder's hurt me in the past when I've made poor choices, which I take accountability for. But is there somebody here who caught your interest?
No, I mean, not for this year. I do like AJ Smith-Shawver as a player, as a prospect. I don't know that I am jumping on any of these guys depending on who gets called up. And we'll see how they shift out the rotation, whether there's a matchup that looks really good for one of these guys. But yeah, I'm not jumping on board with any of these. I'm curious if you're jumping on board with Cardinals prospect Thomas Saggese, who was called up yesterday in AAA this year. In 125 games, he's hitting .253 with 20 home runs and 9 steals. He did hit 25 homers last year in AA between the Rangers and the Cardinals. He was part of the trade that got the Cardinals. He came to the Cardinals for Jordan Montgomery, who went to Texas last year. Saggese was up for 1 game. He started at shortstop, interestingly, which moved Mason Wynn to the bench. That was a little confusing for me, because I swore that Mason Wynn was an everyday player for the Cardinals. I still kind of think he is. So I'm curious where Saggese winds up long-term, whether it's second base and Brendan Donovan goes to the bench. But are you interested in Saggese at all? And does this concern you if you have like Mason Wynn on any teams?
Yeah, I think a lot of him playing Saggese is because Donovan has that foot injury right now, and the Cardinals, they're another team. They're kind of where the Red Sox are, right? They're quasi in contention, but they know they're probably not going to make the playoffs. They probably have no upside if they do make the playoffs. So it's all about evaluation. So why not kick the tires? And man, just the fact that they got Saggese for Jordan Montgomery, when you look at what's happened to Jordan Montgomery in the last few months, that looks like a good win for them. But he's got a lot of strikeouts in his game. He's going to hit probably at the major leagues for, I would think, a negative average. He may hit the occasional home run. The playing time is something I think we can't be guaranteed of because they're going to be a different lineup every day. He was not somebody I proactively added.
Yeah, I'm with you on it. I have not proactively added him anywhere, and I'll see how the playing time shakes out, and we'll go from there. A couple quick hitters to end this, and then, by all means, jump in at the end for anything else. Bo Bichette started his rehab assignment last night, but he is not playing today. He played 4 innings, and the Blue Jays said that was more time on his feet than they had expected, so he's getting today off. But again, he's starting a rehab assignment. Maybe he gets back in a couple of weeks. Yoshinobu Yamamoto returned last night for the Dodgers and looked pretty good. He'll get stretched out continuously, maybe makes 2 more starts this in the regular season. But he should be up over 5 innings or at 5 innings his next start. Luis Castillo was on the IL with a hamstring injury. As you mentioned, pitchers going on the IL at this point in the season, it's problematic. He claims he's only going to miss the minimum amount of time and he'll come back, but he's out at least the next 2 turns in the rotation, with Emerson Hancock taking over that spot for him. And Castillo might return to make 1 final start in the year. So if that really matters to you, you can hold on to him or you can drop him and try to get pitchers who are active and healthy. Tanner Houck is dealing with a dead arm. That's why Richard Fitz was called up over the weekend to get a start so they could push Houck's start back. Houck is currently scheduled to start on Friday, but the Red Sox will see if that dead arm persists, and maybe Fitz will move into the rotation for Houck. So that's a situation to monitor. Osvaldo Bido, who has been great for the A's, was placed on the IL. You don't really have to worry about Basso, who the A's called up, because you're just not going to start him. Ryan Noda was also called up by the A's. Noda was like a really trendy deep league fantasy player at the beginning of the season because he's a first baseman with a really high on base percentage. The A's have basically said that he is going to play every day. He's 28 years old, and they basically need to decide if they're going to keep him on the roster or not. So he should be the everyday first baseman, at least against all right-handed pitching for the remainder of the year. So if you're in a deeper league, that could make Noda interesting to you. Jeff McNeil was placed on the IL. His regular season is over. Jose Iglesias is set to start every day at second base for the Mets from here on out. Ben Joyce was placed on the IL for the Angels. He never quite took over the closer's gig in the way we wanted, but he was getting a fair amount of saves. You're not really chasing saves at the Angels the rest of the way. I know they face the White Sox next week, and maybe they'll get some saves, and maybe you want to take a gamble on Jose Quijada or Ronzi Contreras or whatever, but I think it's really hard to figure out what is happening here and if you really want any of these guys. Kyle Schwarber left Tuesday's night's game with elbow discomfort, so that's a situation just to keep an eye on if Schwarber's going to end up on the IL. And I just had to put this in here at the end, but Anthony Rendon is on the IL with an oblique injury. It's just kind of like lather, rinse, repeat with Rendon on the IL. Though, we'll say, the 34-year-old played 57 games today, and that's the most he's played since this season. That's the most he's played since 2019. So congratulations, Anthony Rendon, on playing the most games you've played in 5 years. Good for you.
And hitting 0 home runs and slashing 218, 307, 267. Man, what is it with the Angels where they get Ohtani and he's great, but it seems like every other time they've opened up the checkbook for anybody, like they did with Josh Hamilton, like they did with Rendon, it goes horribly, like they did with Pujols, of course. It goes horribly wrong.
Yeah. Listen, opening up the checkbook to a 30-year-old third baseman for a really long.
Maybe that's the point. The common thread is back 9 players with Pujols.
Right, back 9 players
Rendon,
off a career year. They opened up the contract to a 30-year-old third baseman who was coming off a career year. And maybe that was not the best use of funds.
And I always come back to this. Somehow they had Mike Trout, and I realize it was a different version of Mike Trout, but they had Mike Trout and Ohtani together. Was it 6 years? They never had a winning record, which is just mind blowing. And Eric, I'm going to give you some access to my computer. I want you to make sure I don't pick up Hunter Strickland trying to find a rogue save for the Angels when they play some of those White Sox games. He actually has pretty good ERA and whip, but like the walk strikeout rate isn't good at all. He's obviously a mid-30s guy. And I agree that it's just one of those things where I think they're just going to go with Ron Washington's just going to go with whatever he feels like that day. It's like, nothing consistent. Even Joyce, who probably should have been the automatic button they were pushing, they weren't playing it that way until fairly recently. In one league, I picked up Joyce only for saves, and then I had to give up on him because I'm like, well, Ron Washington's not playing it this way. I have to respect that. And then as soon as I dropped him, Joyce actually started doing what I wanted.
Right. I did the same thing, and then I added him back, and then he got hurt. And so like,
it's nothing worse than the add back, and then it goes wrong. But the Angels, man, at least we always have Zach Neto. I know he hasn't been that great of late. He did a little bit something this week, but there is one call we got right where he did percolate to the top of the lineup and was the power speed guy that we wanted. But other than that, another insignificant season in the OC for baseball.
Yeah, I should say, just while we're on the topic, if you are looking for saves down the stretch, I'll just throw out a couple of names that could be available in a decent amount of leagues or some leagues. I have covered the Rays bullpen by committee in my waiver wire piece for weeks now. Edwin Uceta is being used as the high leverage reliever, so he will get some saves, but when he's used in the
blew up
7th
last
or the
night,
8th,
but
terrible last night, but he's been great for most of the year. When he gets the saves, or when he doesn't get saves, it's been Manuel Rodriguez getting some saves, and lefty Clevenger sometimes is in when lefties are up at the end of the game. The Yankees have kind of gone to Luke Weaver, and Tommy Canley is in the mix. Clay Holmes could obviously come back into the mix, but those guys, Weaver and Tommy Canley, are worthy adds if you're looking for saves on a good team. You mentioned Hunter Strickland, Jose Quijada, Brock Burke, Ronzi Contreras are guys for the Angels, but I wouldn't really recommend going after that. Jason Foley has kind of taken back the closer role in the Tigers and looked pretty good. Also, Tyler Holton for the Tigers has gotten some saves as a primary lefty reliever. So those are interesting names.
They end the season with 3 White Sox games too.
They do.
If you need one more save in the final weekend, one of those, or even a win in relief, one of those guys could be your hero.
And the White Sox face the Angels coming up. So if you wanted to even take a gamble on White Sox guys, it's kind of like Prelander Baroa is back up, and he was like a really high upside reliever prospect that people were into in the preseason. Him and Justin Anderson. Keep an eye on the Red Sox situation. Kenley Jansen is a free agent at the end of the year, and he's dealing with a lat injury right now. If the Red Sox fall out of it, like for real fall out of it, I think you could see Justin Slayton saving games for the Red Sox in like the final 2 weeks of the season. And as we mentioned, against Tampa Bay and Toronto, there could be some saves there to be had for the Red Sox. So that's a situation to keep an eye on. In Miami, they had to put Calvin Faucher on the IL. And so Jesus Tinoco, who came over, I believe, from the Rangers, looks to be the option there in Miami. You're not really going to get a lot of saves in Miami, but it's there. Chapman and Dennis Santana are still kind of in the mix for the Pirates, but Chapman has not looked good the last few outings. David Bednar is starting to pitch a little better, so Bednar could work his way back in there if he was dropped in some leagues. Porter Hodge with the Cubs is still under 50% rostered, so he's somebody. Now that Jorge Lopez is on the IL, he's like for real the guy. There's no sharing of any kind. So those are some names to keep an eye on if you
really want to hold your nose. Tyler Kinley in Colorado, maybe
Victor Vodnik back off the IL too.
Yep, for sure. Chapman didn't pitch well the last 2 nights, but he did get 2 saves, so I'm curious to see how they spin that. Urseg is getting the occasional save in Kansas City. I know they haven't played all that great lately, but and also I mentioned it kind of in passing with Detroit getting the White Sox. A lot of times when you're maybe this is like a Luke Weaver play, right? With more wins getting pushed back into bullpens because starting pitchers don't go as deep. Sometimes they don't even get the 5 innings at all. A lot of times you add some of these guys, not just for ratio smoothing or not just for maybe a save chance, but you may get a win that you need too. So play the schedule, try to link up with the better teams if you can. There's always going to be relievers on good teams who are under roster, underrepresented. Yep. And so, and I'll tell you, if you win the league because you pick up one of these guys and they get a win and a save on the last weekend, I mean, they will forever be in your hearts. So it can be a really satisfying move as well.
That connection never ends, lasts forever. We're going to get to some specific tips for how to manage your teams, whether you're in or out in this month of September. But before we do that, NFL Week 2 Sunday night is here. It's a matchup between two of the brightest young quarterbacks in Week 2 between Caleb Williams and the Bears, and they face off against CJ Stroud and the Texans in Houston. That's Week 2 Sunday night football. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern time on NBC and Peacock. Not a great first start for Caleb Williams and the Bears, but obviously a lot of dynamic pieces on that Bears offense. The Texans are a team I'm super high on offensively and defensively. I think their defense is going to do a little better here than they did against the Colts. This should be a really fun game.
Yeah, it's a fun matchup. I mean, the Bears have a really strong defense, and it bailed them out in that week 1. And Caleb's going to get there. They have so many good pieces around him. And the Texans, man, they look terrific. They added Mixon. He looked great. They added Diggs, scored a couple of touchdowns. Nico Collins made a bunch of splash plays. Tank Dell was heard from. CJ Stroud just looks like, one of these years he's going to win an MVP, or he's just, the idea when the Bears took Caleb or when the Commanders took Jaden Daniels, the whole idea is like, okay, hopefully this guy clicks and we get the position set for 10 years. Well, the Texans got that guy last year in Stroud, and now for the next 10 years, plus they got D'Amico Ryans, who looks like the right head coach as well. Even Will Anderson is going to be a mainstay on that defense, a great linebacker out of Alabama. But we will never stop talking about this. I don't know why the Panthers took Bryce Young. I don't know if other Ohio State quarterbacks, James, if maybe their failures made the Panthers worried about Stroud, but it seems all silly now because Stroud is that guy. And you get to see him on Sunday night. You get to see game 2 of Caleb Williams. That's certainly a matchup I'm looking forward to.
We'll talk about the Panthers' ineptitude for years. If you are out of it now in September, we're here to tell you, and if you're still in it, we're going to get you some pickups and some streamers at the end of the show. So if you need to scroll ahead, that's fine, but we are going to get some specific pickups. But the idea here is to say that there's still a lot of stuff that we could glean in September that will make us better fantasy managers, whether it's for this year or coming into next year. So I'm curious, if you are out of it in your leagues in September, I know you're not somebody to throw your hands up and say, well, forget it, I don't even care, right? And just let the season end. What are you actually focusing on in September for those leagues where you're not competitive?
I mean, for one thing, I'm always trying to move up a slot or two. And I mentioned this a lot in a home league that I'm in. It's a keeper league, but it's draft format. The way we draft the following season, I think we have 13 teams now. So if you come in 5th, you pick 1st. If you come in 6th, you pick 2nd. It goes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 4, 12, 3, 13, 2, 14, 1. That's how it works with 14 teams. I forget how we do it with 13 teams. But what we do in that league is that you have a carrot. Either you're playing for the money, top 4 teams, or you're playing for draft position. And every slot you move up gets you either 1 or 2 draft slots, depending on where you are in the standings. And I think this is just a great format to emulate if you're in a league where they have the same.
I was just thinking that seems great.
Managers coming back year over year because everybody's engaged, right? And you look at, there's that part of the website where you can see who's been on the website, when they last logged on, and everybody's logging on every day because they care, because there's immediacy there. So that's one thing, just to, if you want to make your league better, if you have a problem with people kind of checking out when they're out of it, maybe you need to give them a carrot like we do in that league. So I
like that idea.
Yeah, so do I. I have side bets with a lot of my friends in leagues too. So like when I'm in league with Frank Schwab, I'm trying to beat him because I need his $25 or $50 or whatever we bet. So I'm competitive anyway. So that's never going to be a problem with me. I'm looking for your role change. A lot of the things you're looking for regular season, right? Where are people batting in the lineup? Who's shown an interest in running? Who's added or discarded a pitch? You do as good of a job as any breaking down all that stuff. Just changes in approach, all the things that players do to try to get better or to try to tinker with things. Is their stance different? Did they add a toe tap? Are they deeper in the box? Are they moving up in the box? Are they swinging more aggressively in the count? Some of the stuff maybe may not be that easy to see, but also just how teams, they're evaluating their talent. Did one player seem to move up of somebody else? Did somebody get a better lineup slot than somebody else? Is the manager coming back next year? Stuff like that. It's more of a nuanced thing, and it's more of a kind of I know it when I see it thing. But teams, I think teams, this is almost like for a lot of teams a glorified, exhibition season. It's almost like spring training all over again, where you're just trying things. It's experimentation. It's evaluating what your talent is like and what the off season goes into. It's not even out of the realm of possibility that somebody may earn a contract because they finish strongly, or may earn a role upgrade because they finish strongly. So teams, we always say that believe like part of what they tell you, but believe everything they tell you with their usage and their decisions on the field. That's what speaks loudest. And that's the type of stuff I'm trying to take note of as we play out the schedule in September.
Yeah. And, I think we've talked about it a lot in the past, that it's not just like, oh, who's ending the season with a hot month, but like who's ending the season with like real process changes and things that are different. You mentioned pitch mixes or swings or stances or whatever, gains in plate discipline, things like that. Those can be like, oh, well, it's just a hot streak, or it can be, this is a player evolving and changing. I loved Eno Saris on a recent episode of Rates and Barrels said, basically the end point of a season is arbitrary in terms of player development, right? Like we say, oh, well, he did really well as the season came to an end. Well, for a pitcher, that end point might not really be an end point. It might be 2 months earlier, he started tinkering with this pitch and adding this pitch, and it got better and better and better, and the season ended. But that's not an end for that pitcher. That pitcher is going to keep working on it, evolving, and then it will continue into the next year. Same with a swing change. If a hitter's changing a swing, it's not like, oh, well, the season's over, so now that's the end point, and then we pick up where we pick it up next year. Yep. It's like it is, the season has ended for us, but for the development of these players, sometimes it's just the midpoint in the development. So you really need to keep an eye on that kind of stuff. Because
and by the way, the patron saint of all this was Jose Bautista, who back in, was it 2009? I want to say, let me look this up really quick. 2009 September, he changes his approach at the plate, and he hits 10 home runs in September. He slugs .606. He's a quasi sleeper the next year, and he hits 54 home runs. Right. And the next following year, he hit 43 home. I mean, Jose Bautista was a monster. And this is a guy who had bounced around Baltimore, Tampa Bay, Kansas City, Pittsburgh. He had never hit more than 16 home runs in a season. He'd never had an OPS plus over 100. I mean, he was just a journeyman, right? He was nothing. And he changed his approach, and he became, at one moment in time, he led the major leagues in home runs back-to-back seasons. And, that's to everybody's style. I don't care. He got hot in September. But this is a positional. This was a change. This was a change in approach. And 10 home runs is enough to me that I think there could be significance to that. It's not like he hit 5 or 6 home runs. He hit 10. So right. I don't know if there's a Jose Bautista that's ever going to happen again, because we're in the age of enlightenment now. Everything is so monitored. But your point is right. Like if that's what I was going to say, I put up this question on the rundown, is like, can we trust improvements in September? Sometimes, the criticism is, oh, we drafted a guy too high because he ended the season well. And if he had that hot stretch in the middle of the year, it wouldn't have impacted the draft stock. And it's important to try to differentiate between a hot stretch and a strong finish that we can connect to a change, right? So your Jose Bautista example is a guy who changed his approach, found success with it, and continued that on, right? So we have examples of some guys, and we'll talk about some guys who are specific to us, but like, I'll jump right in. One of the guys I'm watching at the end of this year is Matt Wallner. Matt Wallner made a clear approach change when he was in the minor leagues. There was an idea to kind of open up his stance a little bit more, because he was closing himself off a little bit. And so he really kind of caught fire for a month or so in AAA before they called him back up. And now, since he's been called back up, I can see like very clear gains with him, right? He's hitting .278 with 9 home runs, 20 runs, 25 RBIs in 43 games. He's also stolen 3 bases. That is a very usable fantasy profile from a hitter with 9 home runs in 43 games while hitting .278. You're telling me I could get a potential 30 homer bat who's also hitting .278 and has some chip in steals, but he has a 33% strikeout rate over that same stretch. So I'm watching somebody like Matt Wallner because I know he's made changes. And so I want to see consistently how those changes carry over the second half of the year to see a little bit of what I can expect next year. I know that he is in the top of like second half barrel rate leaders
all hard hit metrics in the second half, he's near the top of it. So if I feel like, okay, 10% walk rate, 11% walk rate, I can live with. The strikeouts are there, and they'll probably always be there with him, but he's making way more out of his contact. Then, yeah, if I feel some sort of confidence that he can be a 260 hitter next year with that kind of power, that's important to me. It's important for me to gather whether I believe in these changes or not.
Yeah, I think back to like Brent Rooker last year, who's been a big win for fantasy this year. He started fast, faded in the middle of the season, and then he slugged 605 and hits 8 home runs in the final month of the year. And it was that signal. I don't know that there's anything in the change of Rooker at that time of the year, but was that enough to maybe? I feel like he's a guy. He's the type of player too, Rooker, a former first-round pick, bounced around, goes to a team that has a spot for him. He's still at an age where his story isn't told yet. I'm always open-minded. In the case of Wallner, it's again, he's come up, he's been sent back down, he's been kicked around a little bit, but he's still young. I think there's that whiff of upside where his story, he's still a front nine player to me. So that's and the Twins have done pretty well with some of the guys they've recycled or some of the second chance players that I feel like there's a team that maybe it's their player development, or maybe it's just giving an opportunity to guys who have been overlooked in other organizations. But I feel like they get more of those guys sometimes. Maybe it's because they're a smaller market team and they don't have enough eyes on them at times. But I feel like Minnesota finds some of these guys maybe more often than other organizations do.
Yeah, and then lets them go like David Ortiz to the Red Sox.
The thing with Ortiz, right, is he was having a breakout year, and then he breaks his wrist I believe it was on a home run in Kansas City, and he was out for the year. And they just decided, okay, we're going to give up on this Ortiz thing. They tried to sneak him off the 40-man. Yeah. And if he doesn't break his wrist on that home run, I think he was going to have a breakout season with the Twins. I really do.
So we're going to rattle off some guys that we are watching intently down the stretch for us. Maybe those are guys that you will then decide you want to watch, or maybe our reasoning behind them will crystallize some players that you want to watch. For me, the player I'm watching the most is DL Hall. DL Hall came into the year as my most rostered player, and that didn't work out so well with the Brewers. He wasn't so good in his first few starts, then got hurt. He has looked really good since coming back up from the minors now that he's fully healthy. He's been used out of the bullpen, but the velocity is there. He's still young. I believe that he is going to get a shot to be in the starting rotation next year. So I'm watching him at the end of the season to see what a healthy DL Hall looks like, to see if I trust him in the rotation next year. To the same token, I'm watching Brian Bayo. I've been watching Brian Bayo a lot throughout the year because we're obviously Red Sox fans, but he is somebody who, coming into the year, we said if he can develop the slider and get those strikeouts, he's got another level. He developed the slider, and then the changeup went away. And we said, okay, if he can keep the slider but also bring the changeup back, then he's got another level. And so I'm watching to see if we've seen the changeup look great. We've seen the slider look great. We've seen a few starts where it all looks great together, but not consistently. I want to start to see if we can get a little bit more of that consistency, because that could tell me that Bayo is a top 30, top 40 starter next year if we start to see those pieces come together. I'm also watching Jordan Walker. It looks like he's going to get a regular stretch of playing time for the Cardinals down the stretch. We have talked about, the overall upside, the raw upside that he has, but we've also talked about how the Cardinals don't seem to trust him. I think he needs to earn their trust in the second half of this year before going into 2025. So I'm going to watch to see if he can do it. And then we'll end two other outfielders that I'm watching. I'm obviously watching what Pete Crow Armstrong is doing, because I have been really skeptical of him as an offensive player. I think obviously the defense is elite and it's going to keep him on the field. But in 46 games in the second half, he's hitting 284 with 5 home runs, 9 steals. He's also striking out just 20.6% of the time over that stretch. So I need to watch PCA, because if I feel like these plate discipline gains and these contact gains are for real, then he could be a huge value in drafts next year, because I know the speed is elite. I know he's going to play every day. And then lastly, my call for this year's 2024 Josh Lowe at the beginning of the year was Parker Meadows, which is unfortunate because the 3 finalists I had for that were Zach Neto, Lawrence Butler, and Parker Meadows. And I chose Parker Meadows, who's been the worst of the 3. But Parker Meadows has been battling injury. In 29 games, since being recalled in August. He's hitting .308 with 4 home runs, 20 RBIs, 21 runs scored, and 5 steals. That is 5 category upside. That's the 5 category upside I believed Parker Meadows had. So I'm watching him down the stretch to see if I think that maybe I was just a year too early on that this year's Josh Lowe call, and Parker Meadows could be a guy who hits 270 2020 next year or something like that.
Good list, and a lot of guys I'm interested in too. I'm still waiting for Brian Bayo that Pedro Martinez tutelage to maybe pay off. I was also really excited what Andrew Bailey was doing with that staff early in the season, and for various reasons it hasn't maintained over the balance of the season. I'm not blaming Bailey for that. I still think he's a really good pitching coach, but now I just never know when to trust Crawford. I never know when to trust Bayo. I feel like my timing has been off with a lot of these guys. Of course, Houck has been hurt. That hasn't helped as well, but it's still an offensive pitching staff that I'm interested in. My players to watch. So here's a hot take for you. Oneil Cruz is going to have a better fantasy season next year than Elly De La Cruz. They were linked before the season. Elly takes off like a plane, and Oneil Cruz couldn't get out of his own way for a while. I know it's an arbitrary endpoint, and I don't think Oneil Cruz made any changes that would change that arbitrary endpoint tag, but his last 53 games, 309, 369, 517, and 53 games is a nice cutoff because it's a third of a season, basically. 7 home runs, 14 stolen bases in 14 attempts. That by my back of envelope math, that's a 100% success rate. It's happening for Oneil Cruz. We've been waiting. It's been frustrating at times. I know the Pirates, it's like, when are they going to, take that final step and legitimately be contenders? I think next year that they're finally set up, right? Skeens has been monstrously great. Just please don't get hurt. Cruz is finally putting it together. They still have some good players like Brian Reynolds. I'm going to draft Cruz aggressively next year. I want to get him on my team. So when the Tigers signed Colt Keith early in the preseason, right? It's exhibition season, spring training, bought out his arbitration, said he's going to start the year with the team. They were hiding him against left-handed pitching, which I never understood, because you want him to be a foundational piece. You just paid him like a foundational piece. Let him develop, let him make mistakes and figure it out. Well, what's happened is he's actually figured it out quite well. His stats are much better against left-handed pitching, which is unusual for a young left-handed hitter. He actually hasn't been as great as you would think against right-handed pitching, but okay. You do the hard part first. That's fine with me. Colt Keith's a player. I'm curious where they slot him in the lineup. I want to see him do a little bit better against righties. I want to see him continue to hang in against lefties, because I would love to. We always talk about development isn't linear. There's no guarantee that whatever he does this year, he'll build on it next year. Oneil Cruz reminds us of that. But he's become one of my favorite players. Keith has been in this New York lineup. Jazz Chisholm has always been a guy who's basically disappointed us in Miami. Sometimes it's been performance, swinging at bad pitches, injuries. He goes to New York. Maybe he just needed a change of scenery to get him going. He's been really good with the Yankees, although he did have another injury pop in there. I'm just curious to see how he finishes, where he slots in the playoff lineup. Where is Jazz Chisholm as he hits his late part of his 20s? What can we expect for the following season? CJ Abrams, again, development not linear. I thought he was a star on the upswing. He's had a disappointing year. He's really been in a funk lately. He's getting himself out with some bad pitch recognition. Sometimes looking at the best pitch, he gets in an at bat, not swinging at it, then ultimately going down on strikes because he swings at something out of the zone. Maybe it's as simple as an approach, but I just want to see what he does down the stretch for a Washington team. Obviously, they're not in the playoff hunt, but they do have a lot of interesting young players there. I'd like to see Abrams be one of their featured guys. He hasn't played like it lately. It's about time something's gone right for the Blue Jays. Just so many things haven't gone right. You mentioned Bichette in passing. What a lost season he's had. But Bowden Francis, man, he's been one of my saviors for the last 3 or 4 weeks. The low strikeouts, the low walks, the high strikeouts, the stuff plays on the screen. Is this just one of those guys who puts it together for a few weeks? He wasn't really a big prospect, or is this somebody we can trust next year? A lot of times I have trouble knowing where to draft guys like this when they kind of come out of nowhere, but he's certainly somebody I've been paying attention to. And just to put the cherry on the sundae, we already talked about him plenty earlier, so there's no need for a lot extra here, but I'm just happy Jacob deGrom's back in the uniform and he's set to pitch. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know where it's going. I don't know if it'll ever be really a fantasy factor again for season long, but I'm definitely going to watch that game, and I'm just going to enjoy the heck out of it for as long as it lasts.
Yeah. Bowden Francis is somebody, that a pitch mix change connected to that. He added the splitter. He's gone fastball splitter, so that could be a huge thing. If you are out there and you are going to First Pitch Arizona, I am going to be doing a little breakout session, looking at pitch mix changes, that are sticky or not, which pitchers I think will benefit the most from next year in 2025 from the changes they made this year. how often do changes we make in a season carry over success to the next season, things like that. So that'll be a whole session. We'll get to some guys like Bowden Francis, Brian Bayo, things like that, and see if 2025 is their year.
That's a fabulous event, by the way. It's hard for me to get in it because I'm so heavy in football, but
this is it'll be the first year I'm going. I'm very excited.
Chandler Fest is highly recommended. The people at Baseball HQ are great, and they have so many of the top baseball analysts that and obviously Eric will make them better with his presence, but you get a chance just to watch baseball, to hang out, have a beer, have a sandwich with these people, and just get to know them and get to see what just the debates. Will be there. I mean, Jeff Erickson will be there, just Derek Van Riper, just so many great people, all the HQ guys who are terrific. So a strong endorsement to that event.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. We're going to end the show with some pickups, some hitting pickups from my article that came out this week, and we're going to rank our streamers. But before we do that, it's time to dominate this NFL season with a Fantasy Life Plus subscription. Get weekly rankings, start sit advice, DFS analysis, and betting tools. Use promo code SEASON20 for 20% off. Go to fantasylife.com/rotoworld to learn more. I use this all the time. The trade chart that I did, or the trade article that I did today, I use Dwayne McFarland's utilization report in there for all of the snap shares and all the routes run and all that kind of stuff. I have it bookmarked and I go to it every single week. It is a really, really great tool. So I highly encourage you to take advantage of the discount that we can give you over at Rotoworld to get all of that data at your fingertips. It's awesome.
Yeah, Dwayne McFarland, the work he's doing in that piece is just fabulous. It's just it's almost dizzying how much good data is on that piece. And also, you can listen to them on the radio. I was listening to Kendall Valenzuela and Adam Ronis this morning. Adam has long been one of my favorites, just a common sense king. He understands how to play so well. And Kendall is one of the up and coming rising stars of the fantasy industry. And they have a really good rapport on the radio too. So you can check them out on Sirius if you have it, Sirius XM. And, you mentioned Dwayne just doing great work. They have Ian Hartitz over there at Fantasy Life. It seems like every day they're hiring somebody who's one of my favorites in the industry. So much props to them. And it's definitely a site you want to be familiar with because they're just producing so much good content.
I fully agree on that. Some of the content we produced this week was my fantasy baseball streaming hitters article, came out yesterday, Tuesday afternoon. Just want to highlight a couple of the guys that are on here. I basically looked at the pitching matchups over the next 2 weeks for guys who are rostered in less than 50% of Yahoo leagues and tried to identify matchups that are worthwhile to attack. I really like what the Twins have going. The Twins are obviously facing the Angels right now. Then they get the Reds. Then they get not a great matchup against the Guardians, but the Guardians are starting Matthew Boyd and Ben Lively in that series. And so that's not really necessarily two arms we want to avoid. And then they get the Red Sox rotation. You talked about the Red Sox rotation is a little beleaguered right now. So guys like Jose Miranda, Brooks Lee, they are starting pretty much every day for the Twins. And then you even have your Matt Wallners, Edouard Julians, Trevor Larnachs, because there's only one left-handed pitcher over that slate of games, and it's Matthew Boyd. So all of those guys are going to play pretty much every day this weekend and through next week. That makes those guys incredibly valuable. So I like a lot of the Twins hitters. The Cubs have maybe the best hitting schedule over the next 2 weeks. They're facing the Dodgers right now, but then they get a 3-game series in Coors. Then they get Oakland for 3 games, and they get the Nationals for 4 games. So those are definitely matchups you want to attack. Guys like Michael Busch, Isaac Paredes has been bad with the Cubs, but he started to heat up a little bit.
I would say awful. I would say awful for the Cubs, yes, but go ahead.
He has been awful, but he started to look a little better of late. And again, he's a guy who's going to be in the lineup every day. You're going to Coors, Oakland, Washington. That's it doesn't take a tremendous hitter to take advantage of some of those matchups. And so Paredes is somebody who's I think should be rostered in a lot of formats. Also, I know you may be like, ew, I'm not going to pick up any Pirates hitters, but the Pirates had a good series against the Marlins right now. They get the Royals over the weekend. Alec Marsh, Michael Wacha, Brady Singer, fine starters, not people you got to run from. Then they get the Cardinals and the Reds, but the Cardinal starters, they get Andre Palante, Lance Lynn, Eric Fetty, Sonny Gray, who you do kind of want to avoid, and then 3 games against the Reds are games we want to attack. So guys who are playing every day, Joey Bart back off the IL, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa leading off every day for the Pirates. Nick Gonzalez is hitting over 300 since being recalled. These are like 15-team league ads. But those are certainly guys you should want to add. And then I'll just end with next week, the Braves get the Marlins and the Rockies. And yes, it's the Rockies in LA, not in Coors. But, you have some guys under 50% rostered in Tommy Edman, Miguel Rojas, Gavin Lux, who are playing regularly. Tommy Edman in particular hit 2 homers the other day.
Last night,
he's creeping up to 50%, but he's still not there. And I think Edman could really benefit from this final stretch.
Batting in the middle of that lineup too, which I didn't see that coming. The only thing he really hadn't done for the Dodgers was show power, and then he takes 2 Imanaga home runs early. Imanaga, God love him, he holds on and he ends up going 7 strong, and then they had a big inning in the 8th inning. So, but another hat tip to you, by the way. We can both, maybe Lawrence Butler is a hit for both of us, or Zach Neto, but you were the guy who got me on the Imanaga, saying, look, he's a better value than Yamamoto, and he might be just as good. He might even be better. I mean, he might be a sleeper for Rookie of the Year. Was a very polished pitcher over in Japan. So that's certainly something. But listening to you certainly paid off for me with him, because he's been a tremendous value.
I will hockey assist that to Nick Pollock, who got me in on Imanaga. And so it all, you pay it forward. But yes, good advice for sure.
I love you saying hockey assist too, because that reminds me that the season is just under a month away. And we are ready at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm wearing my Whalers hat. Can't draft any Whalers this year. You can't draft Carolina Hurricanes. But if you want to play fantasy hockey, head over to Yahoo Fantasy, where we are open for business.
Always open for business. We're going to end by ranking our streamers. We're just going to do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday here. So I'm going to give you 4 options on each day. Just tell me where you would go, quickly here. So Friday, you get Alec Marsh of the Royals against the Pirates, Edward Cabrera of the Marlins against the Nationals, JT Ginn of the Athletics against the White Sox, and Mitchell Parker of the Marlins Mitchell Parker of the Nationals against the Marlins. Where are you going here?
I'm going to take a shot against the White Sox, even with Benintendi hitting pretty well over the last 6 weeks. I have no idea where that came from, but Ginn he's a guy who's bounced around. He doesn't have much of a resume, but the walks and strikeouts have been good for Oakland. So I'm going to use him Friday.
I like using Ginn. I will use Mitchell Parker instead. I've seen it from Mitchell Parker this year, where I know he's a solid arm. I know he hasn't been pitching as great in the second half of the year, but I've seen enough to have confidence that he's at least a decent major league pitcher going against that Marlins lineup. But I like using Ginn as well. I think of the group, Alec Marsh is the clear last for me, because I think the Pirates offense can be feisty at times. I don't love Marsh right now. On Saturday, it's not a great slate here. You get Patrick Corbin of the Nationals against the Marlins. You get Emerson Hancock starting for Luis Castillo, but he gets the Rangers. You get Brady Basso, who's in the rotation for the A's, taking Osvaldo Bido's spot, and he gets the White Sox. And then you get Chris Flexen of the White Sox against the A's. Where are you going?
The right answer is never Patrick Corbin. When I saw him on this list, I knew it had to be a horrible streaming list. My advice would be, and I know this isn't satisfying to everybody, but I would say wait this out. There are better options on Sunday. And with the screening of football, you might even get a couple of the guys you want on Sunday if you have to double up, or maybe even play the early game, late game gambit. I would avoid everybody here. My strongest takeaway, though, is please don't play Patrick Corbin.
I have Flexen as my number one here.
Yeah, I will. He was my lean too. I had him in bold, and then I couldn't pull the trigger on him.
If I needed to choose these guys, Corbin is my number 2. But that says more about me not wanting to play Brady Basso and not trusting Emerson Hancock against the Rangers. Corbin with the cutter is a little more interesting than the Corbin we've seen before, but I don't really want to do it. Also, he crushed people last week, so obviously he's going to do great this weekend, because that's just the nature of how it goes.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Last day, Sunday, I gave you 5 because there are just 5 matchups that are worth really talking about. You got Cade Povich of the Orioles against the Tigers, Rhett Lauder of the Reds, but against the Twins, David Festa of those Twins against the Reds. And this is in Minnesota, so that's important for that Reds offense not playing at home. JP Sears of the A's is against the White Sox, and Andrew Heaney of the Rangers is against the Seattle Mariners. Where are you going?
Heaney jumps out. I mean, I know he doesn't go the deepest in games, but he's got 8 strikeouts in 4 of his last 5. And that's a starting point with the Seattle lineup where they live to strike out. I think Heaney's going to strike out 10 in this game.
Heaney jumps out to me, and Cade Povich because of the likelihood of them getting wins. I know Povich got lit up by the Red Sox, but I think that there were some pitch mix changes that Povich has made in the last month or so that make him slightly more reliable, but it's still matchup dependent, and I like the matchup for him there. I wouldn't.
How dare you underestimate the Tigers at home, man?
Yeah, but
they are going to score a bunch. They're going to score a bunch. The Lions are going to score a bunch. You do not want to mess with Detroit on Sunday.
Don't mess with Detroit on Sunday. I also listen. I'm a big David Festa fan. I think he's really good. I think the Reds on the road are far less potent of an offense than the Reds at home. I'm more than happy to go with David Festa here. I think he's in for a solid start. And listen, JP Sears was really good this week against a tough Astros team, and now he gets the White Sox. I'm more than happy to take to roll the dice there. Again, anytime you're facing the White Sox, you get a chance for a win, and Sears has looked pretty good. So I like JP Sears as a 15-team league streamer as well.
Yeah, what is the roster tag on Heaney? I'm surprised. It's. I guess this is part of the fatigue kicking in because he should. I
think so.
Mid-season, this guy would be over 50 in a second.
Well, but I think also there's Andrew Heaney fatigue, right? We've all seen him do this before.
That's fair.
And so we're like, well, Andrew Heaney, like we've seen him go on hot streaks. It's not anything that's going to be consistent. He's 37% rostered in Yahoo formats right now. Again, depending on your league, like, if you're in high stakes leagues, he's probably added a lot more often, but just worth a look on the wires to make sure.
I mean, the strikeouts have been there. The 1.20 whip season long is fine. The 3.84 ERA for a streamer is perfectly acceptable. And it's Seattle. Seattle. This is as good as it gets, man. The thing is, strikeout rates, there are certain parks where the strikeout rate goes up because the pitchers aren't afraid that they're going to be taken over the bridge if they have to pitch in the zone. And Seattle is probably I would think right now, the most advantageous pitcher park in baseball.
It for sure might be. It's definitely something to attack for the rest of the year. And for the rest of the year, we will be here on the Rotoworld Baseball Show, trying to give you tips, not only to win your league, but again, we are going to keep sprinkling in some things for how to make you more successful, either in your keeper leagues, which guys you should pick up, maybe to stash. We'll talk about some potential 2025 ADP stuff. So keep checking us out here. Whether you're in your league still, or in contention in your league this year or not. As always, if you could rate and review this podcast, it's super helpful. To get it out to all the other people. You can follow Scott and I on Twitter for both our baseball work and our football work. I am at Samulski NYC. Scott is at Scott_Pianowski. We'll check you next week for another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show.